I'm going to go ahead and delete this layer now. Just click on it and press the delete key. And there you go. And I'd like to now talk a little bit more about interpolation. Let's go ahead and make this layer again a little bit smaller. Globally, I'm not going to keyframe that. And I'm just going to keyframe position so that it moves from left to right. And there you go. Basically, if we zoom in, and I'm going to do so by using the mouse scroll wheel, notice that the path, that means the road that the layer is going to take to go from left to right, notice that this path is made out of little dots. Notice also that there is one of the dots that doesn't look like the others. That is because this is not a position dot at all. This is a handle. Now, our layer is going to move from left to right, but it will not be on a straight line. So let me go over those concepts a little bit. When we interpolate keyframes, there are two types of interpolations that we can use. There is spatial interpolation and there's temporal interpolation. Spatial interpolation just means changes in space. In other words, changes in X or Y properties. In other words, position, anchor point, etc. Temporal interpolation refers to changes in time. In other words, things that change over time but not necessarily in space. For example, opacity would change in time but not in space. It's not moving at all. After Effects differentiates these two types of interpolations. And now you might be thinking that, yes, if something is changing in space, it's also doing so over time. And you would be correct. Every spatial interpolation also contains temporal interpolation. But not all temporal interpolation also contains spatial interpolation, which is why we make the distinction. Let's start by talking about spatial interpolation. If my clip is moving from left to right and is doing so in a straight line, that is known as linear interpolation. If, however, it's moving from point A to point B and it's not doing so on a straight line, that is known as Bezier interpolation. You can change the interpolation of your keyframes by selecting the keyframes, and you can select all of the keyframes assigned to a particular property by just clicking on the name of that property. See, both of them turn yellow. Because all of them are selected, this is going to affect all of them. You can right-click any of these keyframes, and you can select Keyframe Interpolation. This opens a new panel. Under Spatial Interpolation, you can change it to linear, straight line. You can change it to Bezier. That gives you the handles. But you may have noticed that there were other choices in there. Let me explain those a little bit further. I'm going to add one more keyframe here in the middle. And there you go. I'm gonna make this like that. And now I'll move my CTI. Basically, this middle keyframe contains two handles. One for the incoming curve and the other one for the outgoing curve. These handles can work in conjunction with one another, or they can work independently from one another. When there is a relationship between the incoming curve and the outgoing curve, that is known as continuous Bezier. When there is no relationship at all between the incoming curve and the outgoing curve, that is known as just Bezier. There is also an auto Bezier. Let me go over that one first. I deleted all the keyframes by clicking on the stopwatch, and I'm going to start anew. I'll click on the stopwatch to create my first keyframe, move in time, And I'll move the clip here in the composition panel. Move in time again, and move this again. Move in time, and change the position again. Notice now that as I click on the keyframes here on the composition panel, that I see the dots for the handles, but I do not see the handles. This is known as auto Bezier, because we are not in control of the curve. After Effects is. After Effects will place or create or modify the curve depending on the relative position of these keyframes with each other. If I try to modify these handles, notice how they are working in conjunction with each other. In other words, when I lower one, the other one goes up. This is continuous Bezier. There is a relationship between the incoming curve and the outgoing curve. To break this relationship, to change the property of either the handle or the keyframe, I can use the Convert Vertex tool. In the Tools panel, we see the Pen tool right here. If you click and hold on the Pen tool, you will see that other tools appear. The one at the bottom is the Convert Vertex tool. This tool is very usable. If you use it on the keyframe itself, you change the interpolation from linear to auto Bezier. Linear, auto Bezier. If you use it on the handle, you go from continuous Bezier to regular Bezier. This is regular Bezier, this is continuous. It's like a toggle. Linear, auto, regular Bezier, continuous Bezier. So depending on where you click, you can change the spatial interpolation of your clip. Let me go ahead and delete all of these keyframes again, and I'll create new ones. I'll change the tool to the selection tool. By the way, the shortcut to use the selection tool is the letter V, as in Victor. Let me zoom out. And I'll place this clip here at the bottom. I'm going to keyframe position. I'll move in time, and I'm going to change the position of the clip by just clicking and dragging it here in the composition panel. If I click and drag, automatically the keyframe gets assigned to it because I changed the value from what it was before. It is important to note here that if I press and hold the Shift key, I am constraining my motions to left and right or up and down. I won't be able to have any weird angles. This is very useful for when you're clicking and dragging directly in the composition panel. You can choose to not refresh the view of your composition panel if you press and hold on the Caps Lock key. If I change this, notice that this gives you a wireframe preview. There's also a message now that says Refresh Disabled. You can use this for when the composition that you're working on is very complex and it takes for a long time to just render one frame. I'm going to go ahead and deselect my Caps Lock, and the refresh comes back. Now I'd like for the clip to go back to where it was, so I'm going to undo this, which is Control or Command Z. I have now two keyframes, one on the left, one on the right. And now I'm going to go to different parts of the timeline where the interpolation in position already starts happening. I'll create a keyframe here and one here. Notice that I am using the Add or Remove keyframe at current time, which is the icon in between the two keyframe navigators. And I think I'm going to have one here finally, and I'll separate these a little bit more. Alrighty. Now I'm going to use the Convert Vertex tool, and I'm just going to drag all of these up. Notice that it can be very tricky to click on the right point sometimes. You have to be very careful to get it right. So that I am ending up with a bouncing clip. Notice that as I toggle with the Convert Vertex tool, it goes between continuous Bezier and regular Bezier. If you want to modify the other handle, you have to change tools. Go back to the selection tool. In this case, use the shortcut, which is the letter V as in Victor. And now you will see that you can modify these handles however you want. And basically we now have a little bouncing clip in which all of the keyframes are at the bottom, but because of the handles, the curves go up.